Hi, welcome. My name is Mike, and I am an elections expert here at the Elections Group. For those of you who may be joining us for the first time, a little bit about us. The Elections Group partners with state and local election officials to implement new programs or improve processes for voters and stakeholders. We are a group of election experts supporting election professionals through collaboration, thought leadership, and elevating best practices. We've all worked in election offices before, so we know firsthand the kind of challenges that you face as election officials, and we use our real-world experience to help you solve those challenges. I'm really excited to be hosting this webinar today called Building Better Election Websites, Practical Tips for Clear and Trusted Design. This is going to be just a very practical conversation on designing election websites that actually work for voters. So you might be familiar with something called the U.S. Alliance for Election Excellence, which is a nonpartisan collaboration of local officials and organizations. Several are actually represented here on this panel. The Alliance has been working to develop and elevate standards for excellence amongst all local election offices of all sizes throughout our nation. And one of those big standards is communications. So taking a look at how we use plain language instead of elections jargon so that voters actually understand us. How we design things like our websites so that information is easy to access. So our conversation today is going to tie right into those standards and help election officials think about how to be excellent communicators. So I'm excited to introduce our panel, but first I'll just share, and maybe this resonates some of you who are working in election offices, that when I was an election official, often myself or someone on my team was responsible for updating our website amongst all the other hats that we had to wear. And while we really understood elections well, and we were great, or we thought we were great, at posting lots and lots and lots of information into our website templates, we weren't necessarily experts in web design or user experience. And I can remember looking at our website and being frustrated knowing that there's so much great information here, but I know it could be a lot better if I had some assistance. So this afternoon's panel would have been great then, but good news, they're here now. So great resource for local officials who want to learn to communicate better through their websites. So I have talked enough. Why don't I go ahead and introduce our panel? So I'm going to introduce all three of them one at a time. And after I introduce you, if you'd like to, I'll introduce all of you and then we'll go around and I'll say something about yourselves. So we have Christian Franco, the Senior Program Associate with the Center for Tech and Civic Life, Max Bever, the Director of Public Information with the Chicago Board of Elections, and Whitney Quisenberry, Executive Director of the Center for Civic Design. So why don't we go around and start with Christian?
Sure. Thank you so much. Yeah, like it was mentioned, my name is Christian Franco. I'm a senior program associate with the Center for Tech and Civic Life. I think I would just share that I've been with the organization for about 3 years and a half, and I help create, manage, and maintain our generic resources and tools for election officials, one of which is an election website template, which I will hopefully get a chance to talk about a little bit later. Over to you, Max.
Thank you. Hi, I'm Max Bever. Director of Public Information is my Orwellian title. I think it's Communications Director and Jack of all trades, as we often are at election authorities. I've been with the Chicago Board for 4 years now. Before that, I came from the ACLU of Illinois, as well as working for state government and Chicago City Hall, where I also saw some website redesigns of elected officials that I worked with. Very honored to have the invite today and to show off a little bit of chicagoelections.gov. And Whitney?
I'm Whitney Quisenberry. I run the Center for Civic Design. I got into elections in 2000 when in November I was elected to a board of a professional association. There was other election that happened about the same time. And when I joined the board, they said, "You're going to do communications. Go do something about these ballot things." And I'm like, "Okay." So I started going to conferences, started listening to people, started talking about the plain language work, my design work, and what I knew about websites. And the next thing I knew, I was an expert in things like ballot design, largely because there was so little competition for really thinking about how to design election materials in a way that invited people to participate. And 25 years later, I'm really proud to be, adjacent to the election profession. And because I think we've changed so much in terms of how we think about communication and inviting people in and making sure election information is clear. So I'm super, super excited about that.
All right, excellent. Thank you, everybody. So before we jump into the panel Q&A, the Centers for Civic Design has a new tool that they're going to be introducing. It's my understanding it's not even on their website just yet, but we're going to give Whitney a chance to kind of show it off a little bit here. So I believe we have a couple of slides coming, so we'll give those a moment to show up. And all right, Whitney, I'll let you take it for a few.
Okay, so Mike mentioned the Alliance for Election Excellence, and this is something we created as part of the communications standards, or to support the communication standards, including information design, voter communications in plain language. And we call it Designing Election Websites. It is on our website. It is almost on the Alliance website. You can go to the next slide. So because there is a scan code and an address if you want to grab that. We started this work thinking about all the advice we were giving as we talked to people, and we were especially interested in smaller websites. Max is going to talk about a really amazing website at Chicago, but Chicago is a kind of bigger place than the average bear of a small election website. And so we were thinking about what kinds of things people might need to use. So next slide. It's comprised of 30 tips that are designed to set you up for success whether you're starting a new website or just maintaining or updating the one you have, divided in 5 sections for foundations, navigation, design and layout, content and maintenance. And I'm just going to give you a little taster of what's in those sections. I'm going to talk the least about design and layout and the most about some of the early concepts and the things that you need to be thinking about before you even get to designing the visuals of the site. The first one on the next slide is one of the foundations section, which is just to really start by showing how do you show visually to anybody who comes to your website that it's secure and trustworthy. Got to give a pitch for being able to register your domain as a .gov. I did check just before this webinar, and the federal government website get.gov, it's https get.gov, is still up and running and will help any election office get a .gov URL for their site, which is a restricted URL, so you have to be a government agency to have it. But there's other things you can do, and you can see that we sort of, without being able to read it necessarily, that we break it down into where things are, really try to get down into the details to give, so that when you talk to your IT department or somebody like that, you sound just about as smart as you can. The next section is around navigation, and on the next slide. And everything about navigation starts with anticipating and answering questions that your voters might have. They don't come to your site for fun. It's not their daily reading, right? It's a place that people go when they have a question or need to know something or want to check something. And one of the problems, of course, in any specialist thing like elections is that there's terminology. And so thinking about the questions they might have in their head, putting those in front of them, answering those questions throughout the site, not just in a big FAQ, but on every single page of the site is another one. Another guide for navigation is to use headings to navigate in a page on the next slide. So if you look at this, even from the point of view of a mobile site, you'll see that maybe it's ways to vote and it's early voting and there's things that you have headings. Creating some structure, knowing what's the top level information. If you were doing this as an outline, what would that look like? And answers the questions, how do I or how to? It turns out this also helps with making it accessible. So because the visual structure of the way the headings are larger, smaller, greener, bluer, colored, or whatever you've done to make them distinct, the technical structure underneath that they're marked as a heading 1, heading 2, and heading 3 makes it possible for someone using a screen reader to navigate that page just as easily. Okay, going on to one more thing about navigation with a little snippet and guest appearance for Chicago. We love accordions, not for the whole page, but to make the topics on the page easy to find or to make the questions easy to find. One of the great things about them is that they make the page very compact on mobile, where you're not having to scroll and scroll and scroll. It's good for little short texts, and it's good as a Q&A at the bottom of the page for all the things that are beyond the basics, right? All the different things that you might need to tell lots of people. So that's my favorite tip. And this one is on the homepage of the Chicago website, and I bet you'll hear about it from Max. Next week, I'm going to jump over design and move right into content, which is to think about serving up the right amount of content. This is a concept we use throughout everything we do. Leslie O'Flanahan is a plain language expert, coined the phrase, and she calls it bite, snacks, and meals, right? A bite is the shortest amount of information that's of any use to anybody. So the example for that is at the top left, which is just a quick little element that has the date of the next election. A snack gives you a little more. That might be a little box on the side that's got the key dates for the elections coming up. And then the meal is all the details. That might take you into a page that's got all the election dates and deadlines for all of the elections coming up and have everything anybody might want to know about election dates, obviously arranged in a beautiful way with headings and styling and things like that. Staying on content a bit, the other one is to think about special groups that might need information only for them. So that if you on the next page, that's things like people who might have a felony conviction, or students, or people who've just moved to the area, overseas voters, and so on, because they might want to have a place where you can find everything they need to know and link into, right? So on the UOCAVA page, it might say, there's some special voter registration forms and some special forms you could use, and then take you into the place where they can find those. It doesn't have to answer all the questions. It just has to be a kind of central hub for them to work from. And I put this in content as opposed to navigation, but on the next page, really thinking about making sure that everything is accessible. We have a field guide on that and also some more information on our website. But obviously we're required to do this, but we also want to make sure that we're doing it because we want to make sure we're inviting people with disabilities to work. And the field guide is full of more illustrations and more details on things like how do you provide alternatives for images or audio or video so that someone who can't see them or can't hear them still gets the benefit of all the content. Last two is going all the way forward into maintenance. Now, we and CT and TEG together have some resources on doing post-election debriefs. This is a great time to start to think about what your questions are and make that the starting point for what you're going to do in the next cycle to update your website. What are the questions that you got coming in over the transom, over the front desk, or by email, or on the social media, and how can you use that to improve whatever you need to improve on the website? And the last one is to think about procedures that might help make the next election easier. That might be having a good list of, places where there are pages where the dates need to be updated, or reminding yourself about the sequence of notices that you're going to be sending out. Are you going to have a place on your front page on your home page to like remind people the deadlines are coming up, like voter registration deadlines and so on? But thinking about that all in advance and making that part of your SOPs really helps you not miss those things. And so you're ahead of the game. And when someone thinks, whoa, what's next? Or what did I get? Why did I get this notice in the mail? They can just go to your site and there they are being highlighted. So there's 30 of them. They're like this. They're at this sort of nice, we hope nice medium level of detail. And we hope that they'll give you some hints for how to think about the whole problem of the entire site and not just each page of information. And on the next slide, just for a second, we can hold up the scan code if someone wants it, but you can also find it right from our website. So back to you, Mike.
All right, excellent. Excellent. Thank you so much for sharing that resource. And let's see here. So I should also mention that if you do have questions, you can throw them in the Q&A. We do see those popping up. We'll save a little bit of time at the end to touch on those. But if any of our panelists want to type any answers, if that's practical for you, you're welcome to do so. But otherwise, we'll jump at the end. So why don't we go ahead and jump into our question and answer portion. So I'm going to give the first couple just to the whole group, and then in the middle, we're going to give Max a chance to highlight some of his work. So, first question: what's the biggest mistake that you see on election websites today? And anyone's welcome to jump in, or I can moderate.
Well, I can share for when we decided to do our redesign in Chicago. I think we were living our own biggest mistake, which is a homepage that is completely static of information that is hard to find, way too small, and had way too many links and information. I think we know that people get very overwhelmed with too much government or technical information up front, and then they just decide to call us or email us instead, rather than being able to access that information that otherwise they could find online. What began to prompt our website redesign was that we had the same website for 15 years. And not a single thing changed on the user experience for those 15 years. I used to call it our GeoCities website. It had, out of our main page, it was a carousel of rotating pictures that really had nothing to do with our elections or helpful information. It was pictures from a voter forum that took place in 2012, more than 10 years ago. So we knew that we had a place to start there, because we were living where we were getting that feedback from people that, all right, I've gone to your homepage, I really can't find any of that information, I'm frustrated, so I'm just going to come to you instead.
Well, I'll camp onto that. I think it's clutter. I call this the curse of completeness, right? The idea that if you mention a topic, you then have to say everything that someone might need to know about that topic, instead of giving them the bite and then taking them into the, or maybe even the snack, but and then taking them into the details, so that they're, first of all, you can have more information in one place, and also, and I think the other one is not organizing the information in a way that's meaningful to voters, which speaks to what Max just said. So focusing on making options clear, and writing the way you, organizing the way you write in the tone of voice, so that you're really helping voters take action. Almost always they're coming to your page to know how to do something. So if you can give them a direct link to that, great. If you can, I don't know, they're looking for their polling place and have a link to Google Maps, that's great, because you're taking the next step they're going to take anyway, and anticipating what questions they might have.
Yeah, those are great. I'll jump in here and say I think we're touching a little bit on like plain design principles. So I'd say some of those mistakes of like, websites that don't focus on using those design principles. So you can think of some of those include using white space to make content more manageable. I think oftentimes we could be lost in wanting to design a really pretty website and add all these different elements, but that could add to the clutter. So focusing on like making the information as usable as possible. Whitney earlier spoke to using menus and headings effectively, so that you can get rid of that clutter, make especially for homepages, greet the people that are using your website, your voters, with something that's not going to be extremely overwhelming right at the start, and they could sort of find their way pretty easily.
All right, great. Thanks, everybody. So for the group, when it's that time to start redesigning your elections website, where is a good place to start? How do folks get started with that effort?
Well, I'll pick up a really ancient piece of research that we did, which is back in 2012. We cataloged a fairly large number of county websites, and then we did some research with voters, and we asked them what kind of questions they bring to a website. And the top voter questions are the practical ones. What's on my ballot? How, when, and where can I vote? Do I need to bring anything with me? And thinking about how to make those questions kind of visible on the homepage. Doesn't have to answer it on the homepage, but have to give them that first step on the homepage. And then the second thing I would think is not planning from the beginning for managing information throughout the election process. So if you're going to be doing things where you're going to have a section where it's going to update with what's coming up or what's next, or how long is it till early voting opens, you need to plan that design, and also work with your web development team to plan the back end, so that you can have those things pre-written and just plug them in, as opposed to going in and editing the actual website every time. And that way you can use real dates instead of the Thursday before the first Monday after the second Tuesday. You can say November 5th.
I'd say, thankfully, there are many resources like the Center for Civic Design that are out there to be a starting point when you are starting to think about redesigning your website. But I'll tell you what Chicago did too. We started with a survey that we sent to all registered voters. We created in a Google form. We tried to make it ease, not go beyond 10 questions. And we asked voters what they liked about the current website, what they wanted to keep, what they didn't like. Tried to see a ranking of the importance of election topics versus early voting, vote by mail, some of our most common topics. Because at this time, we had not yet had a website that was set up with Google Analytics too. So we were not able to see who was visiting our pages when. So we wanted to ask our voters up front what format of data they wanted to see for download. That was questions for more of our journalists, for our academics, try to get a little bit more into the weeds there, and then just open space for any additional suggestions. And I was happy that we really got over 1,200 responses back to that. Now, we've got 1.5 million registered voters in the city, only about 900,000 of those that we've got email addresses for, but people still took the time out of such a technical questions to get back to us. And we use that survey not only to recalibrate our thinking about our website, but when we put a website redesign out to bid for our RFP, we shared that survey with all potential vendors. And then our eventual vendor, Clarity Partners, really use that as a base to start. We want to do that work up front rather than on the back end, rather than create something that we thought voters might want to see and then have to make changes later. So we started with a survey to all of our registered voters to really create that baseline and ask them what they want to see. So they also felt like they were a part of this redesign process.
All right, great. And actually that kind of ties right into my next question. This is something I never really had the time to do. Wish that I did. What role does user testing play in shaping your content or layout?
Well, I'm just going to say not enough. But I also want to expand it from just user testing, because I think there's formal things like surveys, but also election offices meet voters all the time. Now, you might not meet every voter, but you certainly have connection to them. You have poll workers, you have advisory committees, and finding ways to listen to them about what you're hearing, and even possibly using them as sort of early workshop people. The other is to test the structure you're building and maybe one or two pieces of content, right? Which you can do without building a website. You can do it in a PowerPoint file or just in some Word documents, so that you can begin to try that out with people and make sure that that's strong. If you're working with an agency that'll build it, they'll know how to do this. And then think about how you're going to assess success. Is success that you can think about common questions? Like, you could take questions that are coming on the phone and saying, well, let's see if people can now find them on the website. And that could be very formal testing, but it could also be some very informal, set up a table in your lobby and ask people to stop by and take a look at the new website you're building. You're not looking for quantitative answers. You're looking for insights into what works or what doesn't work. So you don't have to make this a giant project. It can be sort of structured listening sessions.
All right, great. Thank you. And anyone else from our panel want to jump in, or we can keep moving along? So, all right. Here, so this question might as well have been written, by me from 10, 15 years ago. How do you balance providing detailed, accurate information with keeping the site clear and user friendly? I know I already heard the word clutter once in this panel. So how do we do that?
Yeah, I think I want to touch on the accordions piece a little bit and sort of leading into the menus and headings. Those are some of the some great ways to like take a lot of information. We know that you all want to provide a ton of information because there's just a ton of information to provide. But I think when you sort of dump that all into a page, and then it becomes this huge thing where you have to like scroll and read, and there's a lot of paragraphs that are might be like too close together. That is a recipe to get overwhelmed really quickly. So like finding those best ways to divide that information in pages using accordions, especially when you have multiple things that you want to put on a page. It's a great way to hide those big chunks of information so that you don't have this huge thing. I think, Whitney, you spoke to it a little bit earlier, especially on mobile. That can be a little bit of a challenge where you just have to keep scrolling endlessly, and it just creates this not so great experience. Where like if I was to experience that, I might want to get off the website as quickly as possible. So I'd say focusing on that, using those menus and headings effectively can be a great way to provide that detail that's necessary, but in ways that it's a little bit more consumable.
I will also say follow the bite, the snack, the meal structure. It really, really works. And that is how we really wanted to redesign our homepage at chicagoelections.gov. I think we also learned too is that we wanted to have space for one big message. So if you're pulling that up on your laptop, you're pulling that up on your smartphone, we've got some words in your face that are the most important thing. I think what you see on chicagoelections.gov right now is pointing towards our next election in March 2026. I put that up because we just had some suburban elections, and I wanted to make sure anyone who is visiting our website first knew that you're not having an election in Chicago. That is our friends in Cook County Clerk's office, and to drive people towards there. We also tried to use a lot more graphics and images. So things that are familiar icons along with early voting or vote by mail. So something that visually catches your eye with that bite-sized amount of information that gets you to the click through to that full meal of a page later.
The one place where I would say don't be too afraid of a long page might be something like voter registration. It might start with easiest way to register is through our online voter registration portal. Here's the link, but there's 5 other ways you can do it. And then you can have a little menu of them and people can jump down to it. The advantage of that one page is that people can see the overview at the top and then choose the sections they want to read. So whether you do an accordion or jump down links or whatever other technique you use, but making it easy for people to understand what's on the page before they have to start reading.
All right, great. I'm actually going to take one from the audience because I think this ties into something I heard earlier here. So many election websites look like they are from the 2000s in design, look, and feel. We heard the GeoCities reference. What can be done to make these sites look more modern and appealing while also maintaining all the election content in a professional .gov kind of way? I know we're, as election officials, we're kind of told to make, to modernize and to make it look, to map things after a little bit more of what we might see in the private sector, but it might also be valuable there might also be some value into having our things look a little bit more clinical. So how do we balance that?
I'm happy to take this one first, if you don't mind, because one of my quotes when we first hired our vendor is that I really kind of want to make the website look like it's a tube of toothpaste. And the goal there is that it's clean, it's fresh, it's efficient. People, take voting seriously, but it is somewhat like brushing your teeth. It's not, top of people's minds. It can be, an activity you have to do, but it is your civic duty. I think that also the Chicago Board of Elections, we are an independent commission over an elected official. So we also made the choice to say, you know what, we want to stay away from photos. We want to stay away from a lot of material that looks like a campaign website, looks like an elected official. So we actually did some research with our vendor into business websites. So we took the tube of toothpaste comment a little bit more seriously and looked at how we could expand our brand colors, but also create something that was very simplified in our color structure, in our brand structure that focused on our messages, our icons, and the easily defined information that wasn't being distracted by photo pictures anymore or trying to find the exact group of people that represents Chicago. We wanted to move much more towards icons and words rather than cluttering up the site with other things that also gets people thinking like, okay, I'm on a campaign website or I'm on a more political website. We wanted to take the politics out of the situation as much as we could and expand past our like red, white, and blue colors to make it a bit more of an experience for people to go, oh, okay, well, I'm really only want to spend 3 minutes on this website. I want to brush my teeth and I want to get out of here.
Yeah, I would add a simple thing, which is that one of the things that makes 2000 websites look like 2000 websites is that their font tends to be very, very small. So one of the simplest things you can do is bump up that text size. By the way, 2026 and the new ADA rules are coming. So, bump up that default text size, make sure that it expands and shrinks as people zoom their page. And maybe give a little extra line spacing between the lines just to make it easier to read, feels a little friendly. Because when people find it hard to visually read the page, they think the content is hard too. And then I think you can think about, if your website is very small, maybe you can do all the content at once, but maybe you can work that content through the election cycle and think about looking at each page and going, is my key message there at the top of the page? And maybe the rest of the content stays the same as you work through that process.
All right, great. All right, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to actually I've got one more from the one more before we kick it over to Max, and we'll throw a bunch at you. Can you talk a little bit about how plain language on a website improves voter trust and understanding? I know we hear plain language a lot. How does that work into the website context?
I think this one is me. Miss Plain Language. So, I mean, I just said this thing about how when people see things that are hard, they think it's designed to be a barrier. The interesting thing is that this is true of both of the ends of the spectrum. Both people who are maybe avid voting nerds and they're worried about the fine print and the details, but also less engaged voters who think that it's an invisible event sort of shutting them out. So if you can think about not writing like you would talk, because plain language is a little different than that. It's sort of writing in a slightly simplified way, but think about what people need to know and how they need to know it, and it helps them build it. The Scientific American used to talk about having this inverted pyramid structure where you would start with the key message of the article and the details you'd get into more details and more scientific language the deeper into the article you went. So making sure you're doing that. The problem is that the easiest thing to do is just to copy the legal language, right? It's safe, it's easy, and why not? And writing in plain language actually forces you to think about what you're really trying to say and what voters need to know. So restating it in voter terms, right? Maybe not think about the law, but you will have to register to vote. So you can think about how you're going to communicate with someone directly. And all of that is really the important part of plain language, not the grammar part.
All right, great insights. Thank you. All right, so Max, we're going to give you a chance to showcase a little bit about what you did in Chicago, and you already touched a little bit about what prompted your website redesign. So as you were starting that, what were some of the biggest challenges that you faced?
Thanks, Michael. Right. So what prompt was, I got here in 2021. We hadn't had a website change in 15 years, so it became one of my top priorities. What I did discover was how long and how complicated this process was going to take. And I will say, I think the biggest barrier, the biggest challenge at first, and this is probably true for a lot of election authorities, it's that fear of change. As I think a lot of election officials know here, there's that trust that the devil is that is better over trying to change something in midstream, or the idea that we've always done it this way. I think that it's scary, especially if you're trying to create a new way to display election results or take vote by mail applications. If something gets screwed up there, that's trust that you're losing with your voters, with your audiences. So might as well just rely on a system that might not be savvy but still works. So I feel like that was really one of the biggest barriers that we faced starting this process. And then I will say what's really not on your side is time. We're always have that next election that's around the corner. Even in an off year for the Chicago Board of Elections, where we don't have an election in 2025, we really only have so many months before we're already in the prep for the next election. So I will say, if you are considering that, your RFI or your RFP process always takes longer than you think it will. I started 2023 with the goal of having a vendor chosen by March or April. That contract wasn't signed until July, and I needed a fully functional site by late November 2023. So that drastically shortened our timeline. And you have to deal with some of those budget issues and some of those requests in real time. So if you are thinking of redesigning your website, just try to pick the time where you've got the longest runway possible to make sure that you're working with your procurement team, or your legal team, your cybersecurity team, because there's a lot of steps that need to be followed. And you don't want to rush yourself to get to that product at the end.
Thanks. I think that's an important insight that, the biggest challenge isn't necessarily some technical component, but like you said, it's the RFPs, it's the budget process, the approvals. So I think that's important for administrators to keep in mind. So, you talked a little bit about doing a survey. What feedback did you get from voters or even internal staff after the redesign was complete?
So this was very helpful to get just some of the basic functions that we already knew that we needed, but to hear it from voters and to make sure that this was included. And I will say the improvement that had the biggest impact and had the most voters reaching back out to us was a search bar function. We didn't have it before. And that is, again, with having, kind of a more of an old-fashioned static type of website. You think that you can name your larger web pages with the most information that people will know where to go to find it. Even with an improved, I think, titles of our main web page sources, we still struggle with that issue with voters. So that search bar has become extraordinarily helpful. I will say also, this wasn't come directly from our survey, but allows me to watch voter interaction and kind of voter feedback in real time, was setting our website up for Google Analytics, which has really been a godsend because now I know how much time people are spending on our web pages, what is our most popular web page, and especially when we're sending emails to our registered voters, how many of those click-throughs are going through, which days are spiking, are they, is this message resonating with people? Are they opening our vote by mail link? This is very, very helpful to me as a communications director for them changing something midstream if that's not working, or seeing if we've had a really good response to our email communications or to our community group meetings, or whenever we see a spike in our website or new pages being visited, we can now usually attribute it to something. And the efficiency of our online applications. We had a vote by mail online application. We didn't know how long it took people to fill that out. Now we know that's generally under 2 minutes for people, and that a lot of our voters are very savvy using our improved online vote by mail application. If I was seeing that it was taking people 4 minutes, 5 minutes, even 10 minutes, we'd be in trouble. That we're generally under 2 minutes, I know that our functionality seems to be working.
All right, excellent. Thank you. Thank you. So you talked about Google Analytics, and you talked about the adding the search bar. So with if you have limited time or staff, what improvements do you think had the biggest impact?
I will say the search bar again, because that really seems to have cut down on a lot of our calls, our emails. People see that at the top of their page. It's cutting down on having somebody from our staff read the website to them because they got frustrated at some point or another. But ultimately, I think where we used a lot of that voter survey feedback to help us designate our new title bars. So we had a lot of topics that were crammed in there before. And now for Chicago elections.gov, we've got things organized under voting. We've got a section for poll workers. So we try to drive anybody who's an election judge or needs that information towards that section of the website. Getting on the ballot, which is our catch-all term for electoral board, for candidates, for the technical forms. Thankfully, we're not in charge of campaign finance, but I know there's a lot of clerks, recorders, and other folks out there, boards that are in charge of that technical information that we can put under a more friendly title and be like, listen, if you're not looking to get on the ballot, you don't really need to go to these pages. News and events, election results, and then kind of miscellaneous under everything else for about the board. But we were helped by our survey responses and by some of our initial user feedback to organize it as such. So if you are kind of like a one issue person heading towards our website, if you really just need to know early voting, head towards voting. If you're a poll worker and you need to know how do you get paid, head towards this section. So we can really just separate out more of this. So it's less of that hunting, less of clicking through a lot of pages and getting people frustrated when it's more easily accessible within these type of buckets.
All right, perfect. I have one or two from the audience. I won't lie, the Q&A is lighting up for you. So why don't we just take a you touched on coming here in 2021. You talked about the timeline a little bit. How long would you say that whole process, start to finish, took before you had the website up and launched?
So here is the thing, when it comes to your website vendors and the tech folks, there's generally always a solution within a quick time period. It's how much that's going to cost and how much you can actually stay in budget. And one of the things that I will admit that I struggled, that we actually had to redo our RFP, which helped contribute to some of our delays at the beginning of 2023, was how much all of this was really going to cost. So we learned some lessons at the board for, let's make sure that we're doing an RFI first, a request for information, and getting a sense of how much these things might cost rather than, how this is. We have to ask for the budget from the year before, we have to get that approved, and then we have that. And so that's already a year or 2 year process. But when the time came and the vendor that we did select, we were able to create a fully functional new website with a new vote by mail application, with a new access your voter registration information within just under 5 months. It was a lot of work. and it was things that we had to change things on the fly. But it is possible, especially if you find the right partner. It's just making sure that you've got that additional budget, because you shouldn't be afraid of changing things in midstream or taking feedback even after the website is live. So I will say, if you are searching for a vendor, just make sure that you're building in that flexibility and building in that additional budget for yourself to make sure that you're not stuck when you need to get that done live. But my suggestion is really try to give yourself the better part of a year if you really, really can. We've got an RFP out now for a mobile app, and looks like we'll have a vendor selected at the end of May to have that ready at the end of December. Wanted to make sure that we were giving ourselves a lot more time for that type of new tech build. I see a couple of questions I can answer live as well too. What tool are we sending for emails? It's just internal at this point. We've explored Constant Contact. We run into a lot of same issues that I think a lot of people do, is that when we send out a mass email now, we're getting a lot of bounce back, or just the larger email powers that be that say that we're spamming people. So an important thing there that we started doing for all of our emails is create an unsubscribe option that is included at the bottom of all of our emails. Takes us to a non-publicized page on our website that allows people to enter their name, their email address, so that we can actually cut out that email for non-super important ones, or if they haven't signed up for vote by mail, make sure that we're following the rules there too. We have explored third-party vendors, but apparently that really runs into a lot of the same issues. So we are using our internal email system for the time being. We did distribute that survey through a mass email to all of our voters. So I try not to overuse this, but we have on our voter registration, if people include an email address on their voter registration or include an email address applying for vote by mail, we will use that address to send out proactive communications when vote by mail is open, that survey information, when we just had a voter forum, until they tell us to stop.
All right. Fantastic. That's all super, super helpful. So why don't we I'm trying to keep tabs on the clock here. We got a couple more that maybe we want to bounce back to the rest of the group. So how about we have had some questions pop up regarding accessibility, and one specific question was regarding expandable headers. So why don't I just throw just a general question out to the group about accessibility and web design. What do local officials need to be mindful of and be thinking of, and I will just toss that generally out to the group.
Well, there's a couple of different levels when you think about accessibility, because your underlying platform has to be accessible. If you're on WordPress or really any of the big platforms these days, it probably is already what they call accessible ready. They call it accessible ready because you could mess it up, but it comes to you in a form that can be accessible. Accordions are accessible. If you want a really simple rule of thumb, it's that you read the information and then you act on it in that order. So it can't be click on this button to do this. It has to be to do this, click on this thing. So the accordion headers are accessible as long as you've used an accessible tool to create them. Even election data, it can be accessible. But once you get into the page itself, you want to be able to really think about, is the font size large enough by default for most people? Do you have good contrast between the text and the background? Like black and white is good, or black and a very pale color is good. Are the headings on your page real headings as opposed to just decorated text? Any form has to be accessible, and it's not that hard to do. Again, if it's a form structure that comes with your platform, it probably is. One way to test your site that doesn't tell you all the answers, but tells you many of them, is if you put your mouse away, can you still navigate through that page and do everything on that page? Because most of the assistive technologies that people use are emulating a keyboard.
Great, very, very
And just-
important to be mindful of that.
Yeah, and just to say this doesn't mean you can't make your page visually beautiful. It doesn't mean you can't have data. Tables can be accessible. You can also have a visual of a graph, and you could have a link to a data table behind that or under that, or you could just summarize the data depending on how detailed that is. But uh, you know, the tools are there. You have to want to use them. And I guess if you're putting visuals on the page, think about what that visual is saying, because that's your alt text, right? It's saying this is the email address and here's the email address. It's, you know, or maybe you don't need to do it because it's obvious that the next thing is an email address, and you could just what they call artifacting that template, so you can hide it from that graphic, so you can hide it. But if you're putting a picture on it at the top of the page and it's, you know, your beautiful county, then you could give a brief description, you know, looking over the rolling hills and fall colors of our beautiful county. Because now you're giving some texture to why you put that on the page, as opposed to just describing the very details of the image.
Great. And anybody else, any thoughts on anything that's important you might want to share out on accessibility?
Yeah, I will say, our GeoCities website was nearly fully inaccessible. And so that was always an issue that we were facing. Our online vote by mail application at that time had issues with screen readers. It was using a CAPTCHA that wasn't coming up. We had a lot of issues. So being able to build from the ground up with a new vendor that got us up to WCAG 2.0 and above was very important, because we were able to completely redesign the website around accessibility and make sure that we were hitting those deadlines. And we also have a partner that we work with, Equip for Equality. We already work with them on our polling places and making sure that they are accessible, and our ranking system. They also got involved with just making sure that every web page was fully accessible, and then made new relationships with additional community organizations too. National Federation for the Blind of Illinois, as well as our mayor's office with people with disabilities. So I would say, do not be shy there. And the answer is always that we can do better. So seek out those relationships and take that feedback and be proactive about it, because it's always going to be helpful.
Oh, I have one more thing to say about accessibility. One of the things that people with disabilities like to see is an accessibility statement on your web page. It goes down along with in your footer. And it's basically a page that sort of says what you've done, right? So you could say, we have tested our site to WCAG 2.1 level AA. But it's also a place where you can say, we're trying to make this work. And if you find something that doesn't work, we want to know so we can fix it, and provide either an email address or a nice, easy form for them to fill out to tell you what the problem is. The reason this is important isn't just as a sort of legalistic sort of thing, but because when someone thinks you are working hard to make it possible to read their site, and that you are looking at the international standards, WCAG is the Web Content Accessibility Guidelines. It's incorporated into the US government guidelines for accessibility, and often into your state guidelines for accessibility, which is kind of nice, because it means that all the developers who are building these platforms are all working from the same rules you are. But it just means that you're sort of saying publicly, we're trying hard, and you are much less likely to have an angry person if they think that you're going to really listen to them.
Yes, excellent point. Right. All right. Let's see. I think we have time for a few more, and then we can jump into the again, we still have a bunch in the Q&A that we'll try to get to several of those. So for the group, how do you decide what content should go on the homepage versus deeper pages?
Bytes only. Menus, big sections, attractive looking, and just the information someone might need right now. That would be mine. But there's a number of questions about audiences and how you deal with the audiences. You want the tip of that iceberg visible, whether that's the top menu that says, for voters, for poll workers, for candidates, for whatever, or however you have organized this. You want that to be there, but what you want in the middle of that page is, unless it is explicitly a site that's separate for poll workers, you want it to be information for voters. There's a lot more of them than there are of any of the other things.
I was just going to quickly say, I like to think about the homepage as a central navigation system, if you will, a steering wheel. You want to have that information that's most important. If it's just voter facing, ask yourself what information do my voters need right away when they access the website? And the answer to those questions, probably means you need it in the homepage. So you can think about voter registration information, election results, even information about polling locations, poll worker information, accessible voting, things of that sort.
And I would just say again, bite, snack, meal, follow that. That's extraordinarily helpful. I will also say rule of threes is the way that we set up our homepage with 3 main buttons too. There's one main message, and then underneath that, we've got 3 main buttons that we can change out depending on the season or what we know can predict voters are going to be asking questions about. Right before vote by mail opens, I got to switch one of those over to vote by mail. Right before early voting opens, I'll switch one of those over to early voting. Registration generally is the one that stays on there the entire time until right after an election when registration is closed. There's something still to the human brain about the rules of 3 that's very helpful, I think, to see those buttons. And again, with Google Analytics, I can keep an eye on how much those pages are being visited. And if one is dropping off, I can push up another message instead.
All right, great. Hey, how about one more question from me, and then we'll jump over to the Q&A. So of course we couldn't go through a panel without asking about the future. So why don't we say what trends or technologies do you see shaping the future of election websites? If not sci-fi, maybe just like what's emerging now? What's on the horizon?
Well,
I'll give it
it's not
a,
even,
oh, go ahead, Whitney, sorry.
I was gonna say, it's not even on the horizon. If your site is not optimized for mobile, it should be, because that's actually in the rearview mirror already. People are on their phones. And in fact, a lot of the questions people might have on election day, which you can't answer later, are going to be mobile questions. Wait, I left the address of my polling place at home, or it's locked. Where do I go? All of these questions, they need an instant answer to, and they're not going to be on a big, nice desktop when they ask it.
No, that's a very important distinction. And part of our analytics that we figured out now is that over 70% of our voters are visiting our website on a mobile device or a tablet. And we still have improvement to do. This is something that is going to continually be an active process, making your website more mobile friendly. I will say the next thing that we're working on is a mobile app. Whether or not that's going to be successful, I guess we'll see. I've gotten feedback both ways of, all right, that's a good tool to have, or maybe you should just focus on the mobile friendly version of your website. It's going to be allowed the same information anyway. We've got this feedback from our city council. We got the funding. We want to explore this. We're going to get it built. I think a lot of our goal there is, rather than coming to the website fresh and new every single time and having to sign in your information, and that can often be a block. We're still dealing with trying to protect voters' privacy, but also not have so much login information that stops them from being able to access their info in the first place. And even just having a first name that's spelled differently sometimes is still this block on our front end. Having a mobile app, we want to create an experience for some of our most trusted, reliable voters that are going to vote, our vote by mail voters, our permanent roster voters, to have something that they're signed into all the time and they don't have to start new. Also for voters that they can have something that automatically translates directions to the polling place to their Android or their Apple device, to whatever map service they're using, that's all seamless. So we're thinking of our mobile app more as something that can be installed on smartphones of our most active voters, the ones that really seek out this information and don't want to start fresh every single time. And we're going to see how that goes. But that is our attempt to move forward in the future, because we think interactive maps, smartphone coordination with directions, reminders in people's calendars, especially of deadlines or when things are due. This is where voters are already at, so we need to meet them there.
I really love that, thinking about it as the sort of my voter page, and all the things that you have there. But it also means if you have an app that you can do things like easily provide Google directions. So a hop into the map, preload, bringing that address over, or, or having linking to photographs of that building in case it's one they might not recognize in a complex. So it gives you the ability to do some things that you might not be able to do. And for that, it's sort of lovely. But I do love it as a voter portal, because that's almost like a little app within your website already.
That's the goal, Whitney.
All right. Since we're going to be getting close to time, why don't we take a few more from the Q&A? So we touched a little bit on this. Metadata. So how important is the use of metadata, keywords, descriptions for search engine optimization, so that your website's easier to find?
Less than it used to be. The things that Google tends to read now and other sites tend to read now are, what are your headings? So they're looking at the priority of the information and the words you're actually using. So if you're saying election jargon, election jargon, election jargon, it might know that it's an election website, but it may not know what you're talking about. But if you've got nice clear headings, you've got, how to vote, early voting, then they're using that and the site structure more, partly because people were gaming it, right? They were filling up their keywords with things that were garbage. And so Google kind of changes this all the time. But the other thing is, if you're thinking about it, one of the things you can do is look in your Google Analytics and see what search terms are bringing people to your site. And you can make sure that those show up. And if they're not the ones that match your words, you can think about either changing them or, how do you adjust to that input? But knowing what people are really asking for that leads them to your site helps.
I will say this is something that we relied on our website vendor quite a bit to help us set up and put in the first place. I will say that we had a big focus to make sure that people just had better understanding of what was suburban Cook County and what was city of Chicago. So we made sure to really push Chicago in our SEOs to just make sure. And now when people are looking that up, I can see on Google, I can see those search engines have a lot more clarity.
Love when I pull up an article that's from a local newspaper and it's from, Hamilton, and you're like, Hamilton where? And you control that, and sometimes they don't even have it in the footer, and you look for the ad and you see the address of some vendor or a local restaurant. And you go, oh, it's in Ohio, So being able to in a massive search results differentiate you from, luckily you probably don't have many other Chicagos to compete with, but if you have a town name that's kind of common. I mean, I live in Cambridge, Maryland, not Cambridge, Massachusetts.
Yes, for sure. As we move around, we realize how many unique city names that we thought were unique to our state are used throughout the country. So let's see. How about time for just one more, because we are just about up on the hour. Do you have any recommendations on election office web pages that are housed within the county's general website, or whether the election department, kind of goes off and has their own website?
We actually talk about this in the guide that we shared earlier. We actually started from how do we help people who have a one-page election website? It's the same thing. It's the same rules, right? Which is make sure that the big topics are visible. Keep it shorter, use expanders if you have to, or accordions. And the last is, if you are sending people to the state for things, like maybe it's going to be a state voter registration form, a state lookup for something, then make sure people know that they're being sent off to someplace else so they're not surprised.
All right, fantastic. I would love to keep going and going, but we are up against the hour, so I'm going to honor that. So I just wanted to first and foremost say thank you very much, Whitney, Max, Christian. This was great conversation, and I found it super insightful, and I'm sure our audience did as well. Sorry to those who didn't get to the full Q&A, but I've noted some of those. Sorry, I've noted all of them, but so I just want to thank everyone for joining us today, and to our panelists again. This was a great discussion. The resources mentioned in today's discussion have been placed into the chat. As always, our inbox is open, so if you have any additional questions, please email us at support@electionsgroup.com. So thank you very much, and we will see you next time.